Let's get into the fourth session. Now, again, let's keep it all in perspective. No guaranteed outcomes. No, you're bad, you're good, you're right, you're wrong. You're broken, you're fixed, you're toxic, you're not. That's too personal. It's more like circumstances, right? So we have to filter this through the lens of intentionality, right? So what I'm going to get into over today and then probably tomorrow is the idea that it's about the relationship and not the partner in the relationship. We're going to pour into the health of the relationship. We're going to study the functionality of the relationship. We're going to be intentional about fostering the growth of the relationship. I personally believe that we put too much emphasis on the other person in a relationship, right? Which is also problematic because it implies that I am inherently unflawed and she is the problem, right? That's an issue. So I like myths and misconceptions. That's what I'm going to call it. Also, we're going to look at this as it unfolds. Maybe our problematic, again, because I think things are perceptual problems. So maybe the problem with our perception of what a romantic relationship should be is cultural, right? When we look at compared to other cultures and other linguistic determinists, like with the Greek language, and you look at things like arranged marriages in Eastern cultures, you see significantly different mindsets, we'll say, is a good way to look at it, right? I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying I think it's influenced by our culture as much as it is by anything else, right? So here's the first thing that we have to look at, kind of the first problem, we'll say. And again, not the problem with you or the problem with your significant other, but this is the problem with the mentality in regards to romantic relationships, I think, in our society today. To start, if I were to give you an assignment and say, okay, you're going to get 10 bonus points if you define this word correctly. Vocab quiz, here's your answer choice, here's your word bank, connect them together, right? If I told you to write down what you think the definition of the word love is, I probably wouldn't get 30 different definitions, but I would probably get at least 15 different definitions, I'm willing to bet. Because the reality is, it's a moving target. We have a hard time with the concept because we don't even know how to describe what that concept is. There's very few things that are as important as your romantic relationships that you literally don't even know how to explain what they are. Like if somebody says, well, how are your finances? How is your investment portfolio? I don't know what an investment portfolio is. No, if you have one, you probably know what it is. But people enter into romantic relationships all the time and have no idea what it is that a functional, loving relationship looks like, right? And that's the key. Again, we're going to talk about the relationship. We're going to talk about function versus dysfunction. We're not going to talk about people versus people. So here's why it's problematic. I have found that I don't even know if it's the most common, but I've found that there is a very significant amount of people who believe, at least explained to me, that love is some type of emotion. It's a feeling that you have, right? Like you can accidentally fall into love, like you're walking down the street and fall in a manhole, right? So that you can also accidentally fall out of love somehow. I don't know how that works, right? It's a feeling that you have. I can't help it. But you're not a wolf. You didn't imprint on some rando, okay? No, it's not how it works, right? It's an emotion. Well, maybe it's not just one. Maybe it's like a bunch of emotions. Maybe it's like a combination of emotions. It's like this, like sprinkle in some intimacy and sprinkle in some like trust and vulnerability and get, some physical attraction and sexual, aura in there, and then boom, we got it. There it is. Well, that's problematic because you have loving relationships in lots of different capacities and they don't have the same feelings attached to them. So it's obvious that there are feelings that correspond with a love relationship, but the idea of love itself is not defined as a set of feelings, right? Well, is it a mindset then? Is this like a perspective? Kinda. It's closer. It's getting there, right? Is it a chemical thing? A lot of people believe that it is. Is it a cognitive thing? It's an understanding. Like, well, you tell your mom, you're like, well, I love him. And she's like, you don't know what love is. It's like some dramatic movie, right? Well, you literally don't know what it is. I mean, maybe you don't. Maybe you kind of think you know what it is, but you can't describe it. That's a problem, right? So let's unpack it. Okay, the first thing is, let's talk about people versus relationships. I think this is important. I think we put too much emphasis on the people in a relationship, and we don't look at the relationship as its own entity. Okay? And I don't mean that the relationship is some like cosmic karma that's pulling the strings on either of you. This is what I mean. I think when we focus our energies on the health of a relationship, it gives us a sense of responsibility as half of the members of that relationship, and it takes the blame game away from, like, think about it this way, like, let's use the metaphor of a coin. Coin has two sides. So let's say your heads and your romantic partner is tails. Well, if there's a problem in the relationship, well, what we tend to do is we're like, well, let me look at how dirty the tail side of the coin is. Right? That's how we look at things. And we say, I'm going to sit there and polish and fix the tail side of things, and maybe I can make them into a functional partner. Meanwhile, what kind of self-help is going on there? What kind of evaluation is going on there? What kind of contemplation is going on there? What kind of reflection are you doing about your own role in this scenario? No, it's more about how healthy is this relationship. You can have two functional people, and they can be in a very dysfunctional relationship. So a relationship has boundaries. It has parameters, right? And we'll get into that a little bit more when we get into the relationship killers. But I'll give you some examples. Like, what happens if you have two well-intentioned people, but they are really dysfunctional communicators? Uh-oh. Or what if they both have a lack of control over their emotions? Uh-oh, that's volatile. What happens if you have two functional people who work well in most of the aspects of their life, and they mean well, and they want to do well, and they want the relationship to be healthy, but they have dysfunction about them, right? They might hide things because it's easier to not fight about them. That's dysfunctional. And you think, well, I'm doing a good thing for the relationship because if I don't bring it up and she doesn't know about it and we don't fight about it and I'm not mad and she's not mad and what she doesn't know won't hurt her and everything is good. That's really dysfunctional. So it's not so much a people problem as it probably is like, what is the health of the relationship, right? Both of you are functional people separately, independently, in various aspects of your life. But for some reason, whatever it is you got going on here is just not functional. So I think the entity or the relationship, in the literal sense, whatever combination the two people can have can be unhealthy. It can be dysfunctional. Toxic people versus toxic relationships. I like this. This is an important distinguishment to make. I believe that people are inherently selfish to an extent. I think we have a tendency towards that because I think it's beneficial for you as a species to look out for your self-interests, right? So I think that people tend to be selfish. I don't know that people are naturally narcissistic per se, but I think we tend to be self-serving. So if people are naturally selfish and they naturally give themselves a free pass, right, that's an issue. But I also believe this. I believe that people are inherently good. I don't think that people are born bad. I think they're born good. So here's what I want to say. I don't think there are toxic people at birth. I think that there are traits that people start to possess that can become toxic in a relationship, right? Because it's really easy. It's a cop-out to say, well, that dude was just toxic, so I kicked him out of here. Well, maybe he was displaying toxic traits, but does that mean he's destined to be toxic forever? Now, pause. That doesn't mean that you should be the person to spend the time and the energy to help them solve those toxic traits. I get that. That's also valid. Maybe you don't have the time or the energy or the wherewithal to be the one to help them solve that problem. Not at this stage of your life anyway. They got to figure themselves out. But I don't want to blame people for their traits, right? I don't think that toxic things that people tend to do in a relationship are like inherently natural. Right? I think that we have a natural leaning towards self-centeredness, and if we don't combat that, if we don't become aware of that, then yeah, okay, that can come up and flare its ugly head. But again, it's too much of a cop-out to blame the person. Well, that guy was bad. He's gone. I replaced him with a good person, right? Function versus dysfunction. That's the verbiage we're going to use. Like, is that relationship functional or is it dysfunctional, right? Because again, it's not so much the people. It's like, okay, well, for whatever reason, this pairing is just dysfunctional. You got to fix it, right? The health of the relationship. That's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to define it. What does a healthy relationship look like? What does a dysfunctional relationship look like? Or what is a toxic relationship? All right? So if it's not about the partner, and it's about the relationship, right? Here's why that matters. When you're constantly focusing your attention on the flaws of the other person, then you think, okay, this person is the source of the problems in this relationship. So the natural solution for a toxic person in your life is to replace that person with somebody else, right? But I got news for you. If you have an unhealthy relationship dynamic, that doesn't get instantly more healthy by replacing the other partner. It doesn't just fix the problem. People aren't just functional or dysfunctional. They possess or display traits that are healthy or unhealthy, right? So if you have two willing participants, I thoroughly believe this. If you have two willing participants in a relationship, you can overcome any history. It doesn't mean that you maybe should in every case. Maybe you don't want to try to overcome physical abuse. I wouldn't blame you for that. But I'm saying that you can. If you have two willing participating parties, you can overcome anything, right? But if you have one person rowing the canoe in a circle, that's a problem, right? So I don't want you to leave here and be burned out because you're trying really, 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 really hard to make it work and the other person doesn't care. All you're going to do is burn out. All you're going to do is become jaded, and that's how you get emotional problems. So you do have to have two willing parties, two participants, right? But I think unhealthy relationship patterns and traits can be overcome by people who genuinely want to fix the relationship because they're going to do what they need to do to fix the relationship when they're focused on it. Because again, we focus on the person, we should be focused on the relationship. How do we make this relationship more functional? How do we make it more healthy? In other words, you're not the problem. I need to learn how to more effectively communicate with you, right? So I come home from work and I'm angry at you and we fight. Let's think about that. It's like Freudian, like displaced anger. So like if my spouse is standing right here and her and I are arguing over something that I'm mad because something happened to me at work. So I come home in a bad mood and I fight with her. She's not the source of my problem. She's not even who I'm mad at. No, but in a dysfunctional emotional fit, I'm short-tempered and I'm taking it out on her. You see the difference there? So when people fight, it's not even so much that they're fighting with each other, about each other. It's that they're fighting with each other over something completely unrelated. The only source, or your deepest source, I should say, of emotional support is who you're attacking. Why? Because they're the one that happens to be standing in front of you. That's the difference between dysfunction, unhealthy relationships, and healthy. Because maybe the person isn't unhealthy, maybe this person isn't unhealthy, but the exchange, the interaction, the communication is dysfunctional. So, to fix that relationship dynamic, we don't replace the people in the relationship, we replace the communication dynamic. You see how that works? You learn how to effectively communicate with one another. You learn how to identify what the true root of the problem is. So you're not blaming someone else with displaced anger for something that's not their responsibility. Right? You're not carrying that over into the other aspects of your life. Right? So, it's worth considering this. Some people would ask the question, why do I need to be in a committed relationship? Why be in a monogamous relationship? Why do I even care if I have a romantic, loving partnership? Well, it's not so much that you have to have that. I'm just willing to roll the dice and bet the odds that you're probably at some point going to want to have that, right? That's just built into your DNA, right? We are social beings. We bond with people. We connect with them, right? Oxytocin, right? And here's the other thing. I think it's very beneficial because it's very difficult for you to go through life by yourself without an emotional support system. And you're not going to live with your aging parents forever. And your mom's not going to be your emotional support forever. At some point, you're going to have to pour into another relationship so those people can support you and lift you up when you need it. And you can support them and lift them up when they need it. Right? You need help. You need support. Right? It's much easier to navigate the difficult circumstances of life when you have a partner with you. It's just much easier to do that. And here's the reality. Like most American or even Western couples, they kind of get it backwards, right? Like they're all committed and on the same page, and then they have kids. And the kids are like, they say things like, oh, I've never loved anything this much. Wrong. Immediately wrong. Immediately wrong. Immediately wrong. Wrong order. Right? And then the whole relationship becomes about the love, the unconditional love for the child. And then that child who wasn't there before in the marriage and isn't going to be there after in the marriage, meaning the marriage is going to span the child, then you get up and move out, and now all of a sudden the relationship's dysfunctional again. So let me be the first person to tell you this if you've never heard this. You should not be more important to either of your parents than the other one. You are less important than their spouse. Congratulations, there you are in the totem pole. Their relationship with one another far should exceed their relationship with you. That sounds horrible. No, it doesn't. Their job is to raise you, to love you, to show you the ways of the world, and then make you a functional, independent adult. Fly, bird, fly. You are not more important to them than their spouse, because if you are, it's dysfunctional. That should not be the case. Right? That should not be the case. There's a pecking order, and you're not in the top two. You might be the third. I mean, let's just be honest. But you're not in the top two. Okay? That's not the way it should be. So the purpose, again, this is about a connection, a commitment. It's a partnership in literal sense is what it is. It's a chosen, intentional partnership. It's a commitment that you willingly enter into and perpetuate and continue. Right? It really doesn't have an easy way to define. So some things to think about, and this is where we'll land until tomorrow. But so there's two issues when it comes to a romantic relationship. Well, let's say with the problems with romantic relationships. There's all kinds of reasons why they fail, obviously. But the two issues that I personally see is that the unrealistic understanding of what love as a concept is, and then the unrealistic understanding of a relationship and what the relationship is supposed to look like. So again, we're not going to blame people, we're going to say traits. So there's toxic traits, there's healthy traits, there's functional traits, there's dysfunctional traits. So let's keep it in the realm of the health of the relationship. Right? So let's start with this. Think about why you would enter into a romantic relationship. I mean, it seems obvious, but realistically, I mean, think about it. It's a biological thing. There's romantic attraction. There's like physical attraction. There's the emotional bond. There's the desire for a partner. I mean, there's lots of reasons why maybe you never really think about it, but there's lots of reasons why you would actually enter into a romantic relationship. For whatever your motivation of why you would enter into the relationship, let's look at why they may possibly thrive or why they may possibly fail. Okay, here's an issue right off the bat. A lack of understanding of your role in a relationship, right? So think about this. This is rhetorical. Is the purpose of having a romantic partner to serve yourself, to serve how they make you feel? They're supposed to be fulfilling you. They're supposed to be making you happy. They're supposed to be supporting you, right? In other words, maybe no one would openly admit that, but it's really problematic to suggest that you gain your happiness from another person. Right? So people think that, though. They say, well, this person completes me, or, I'm happy when I'm with them, or they fulfill me, right? Exactly. That's incorrect. That's not the right way to look at it, right? It's not a realistic expectation for somebody else to make you happy. You're responsible for your happiness. They're responsible for their happiness. You're hopefully both just two functional people kind of driving the vessel together. That was the metaphor I used before. So think about this. When the role of the person in the relationship changes, like what happens when they need your support? What happens when it's their turn to put their career first? What happens when it's their turn to have a crisis in the family? What happens when they need you, right? So it can't just be a one-sided thing. It's not just about what you get out of that relationship. It's not the other person who fulfills you. They're not your other half. They're not your soulmate. They're not the person who completes you. They're not there to make you happy, right? It's very self-serving. Because the other side of this is, what if we think chemically? What if we think, well, I'm excited, I'm romantically attracted, and then there's passion there, and then what happens when that passion fades? Okay, so let's look at healthy relationships in comparison to dysfunctional relationships. So a couple years ago, I was doing this exercise when I was typing this out, and I was like, I'm going to write down all of the things I could think of, toxic traits, toxic behaviors, bad behaviors, and healthy ones. And I got this long list, columns and columns. And I put them all into categories, and I came up with 3 in each side. So I have the healthy relationship and what it's based on, and then I have the opposite of that and what would be the dysfunctional relationship. So the first one I came up with is trust. A healthy relationship is based on trust. Whereas an unhealthy relationship is based on suspicion and deceit. And that may not just be lies. It might be things that you don't tell your significant other, things that you keep a secret, things that you hide, things that you find easier not to tell them, right? So it's the opposite of trust. The next part of that is communication. A healthy relationship is based on communication. What happens if you have insecurities in your relationship? What happens if you have doubt? What happens if you have suspicion? What happens if you wonder if that person cares about you? Are they cheating on you? Are they doing something that makes you uncomfortable? Is there a problem that you would like to bring up and address? Because again, it's healthy to have boundaries in relationships. So you should be able to bring up what it is that bothers you in a healthy way. A safe space to communicate, right? And there's a healthy way to communicate. It's not accusatory. It's not attacking. It's all based on how you feel, right? You're going to bring up the things about your own feelings, the way that you feel. The opposite of that, of course, would be isolation. And I qualify that by saying emotional isolation, because I don't want you to get the impression that we're talking about somebody's like ghosting you or not talking to you or something like that. And that can happen, obviously. But I mean the concept of not letting people in. If you don't communicate because it's easier to not fight, that's problematic. So what does that look like? Well, people emotionally isolate the other person. You don't bring it up. You just kind of bury it. You just kind of internalize it. Maybe you rationalize it. You say it's not that big of a deal. Maybe they were well-intentioned. I don't want them to get mad. I'm just not going to say anything. So that's isolation, right? And that can become problematic because you're going to become the one that becomes resentful in that scenario. So finally, a healthy relationship is based on some level of sacrifice. That means genuine acts for something that's outside of your comfort zone for no other benefit than the other person's benefit, right? These are selfless acts of things that you would do, sometimes just for no other reason than showing people that you care about them. But things that are helpful, things that are beneficial. Sometimes it's a big sacrifice. Well, maybe you have to sacrifice something that you want so that the relationship can thrive. Maybe it's something that you give up, right? Maybe it's picking your battles. Maybe it's little things. Sometimes it's little things, right? Like a gesture. But the point is this. I don't want you to think that, to mistake the idea of someone being controlling, right? It can become very problematic very quickly if there's one party in the relationship that's doing all the sacrificing and the other party is doing all the taking. That can become very problematic. So it doesn't mean that you never get what you want. It doesn't mean that you never get to, again, that's why communication is key. If there's something that's important to you, you bring it up. You communicate about it. You come to an agreement. But at some point, both parties are going to have to be willing to sacrifice on things, because that's what makes the relationship healthy, right? You're giving up something that you want for the benefit of the other person, right? That's very important in a healthy relationship, because the opposite of that is selfishness, right? Selfishness is a little tiny cancer, right? It's little tiny things. You don't pick your battles. You always have to win. You want what you want. You don't see why the other person doesn't want it, right? I gave this example in another class. It's kind of a silly one, but you have to understand that in a romantic relationship, boundaries are healthy. Boundaries are healthy, and we don't want people to be controlling. But what happens if your significant other genuinely requests that you don't do something, right? Maybe they don't want you to go, I don't know, I think the example I gave was they don't want you to go to hang out, right, with these friends of yours that they don't trust. And you might say, well, wait a minute, that's a little controlling. And maybe it is. I mean, circumstances determine a lot, but here's my point. It is unrealistic of you to be selfish enough to not expect that you're going to have to create some healthy boundaries in a relationship. And sometimes creating healthy boundaries means you giving up something that you want. So for instance, you might think it's perfectly fine, and coach, you said it's based on trust, that my boyfriend's just supposed to trust me when I go hang out with this dude who's been my friend since 7th grade in the middle of the night at this party. But you might have to be sacrificial from the standpoint of understanding it's healthy. Right? I don't want to put my significant other in a position where they have to worry about what I'm doing, right? Or they have to worry about, am I going to get in a situation where, I make a mistake, right? Creating boundaries is healthy. Creating boundaries is healthy because it's based on sacrifice. That means, think about that from a loving standpoint. That's your willingness to give up something because it means more to you that the relationship is healthy. Now, it doesn't mean you give up everything, and it doesn't mean that every request is reasonable. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. You have to be the judge of whether or not you think it's reasonable. But again, that's why communication is key. And that's why trust is key. If you trust your partner and you communicate about your concerns and they legitimately have a problem with it, then you just have to trust. Okay, I trust your judgment. I know you're not controlling. For whatever reason this is a big deal to you, I'm not happy about it, but I'll do it. Right? And that can't be the case always. It can't be a one-sided street. I think you guys know that. But it's important that you understand it's not like you're going to get what you want all the time. If you're not ready to be selfless, then don't get into a serious relationship. Because you can't be the one that wins all the time. You can't be the one that gets everything all the time. Think about this. It's contagious too. When both of you are sacrificial and both of you are doing things outside your comfort zone, little gestures here and there, things for no other benefit than serving the other person, that's going to snowball, right? That's going to snowball. And then both of you are going out of your way, right, to benefit the other person. That's healthy. That's functional. Because the opposite of sacrificial is being selfish. You're only concerned about what you want. And sometimes it's okay, right? Again, when there's a balance and there's trust and communication there, sometimes you want something and the other person is going to be selfless. They're going to be sacrificial and they're going to give into that and they're going to let you have that, right? So I like this statement. I want you to just kind of shift your paradigm on this. Don't think of love as a single emotion, right? There are obviously emotions tied into loving relationships, but love is a commitment that you enter into, right? It's almost like this understanding. It's an agreement, right? It's a relationship is what it is. Because you might say, well, I love people I'm not in a relationship with. And from a temporary standpoint, that can be true. But think about all the loving relationships, your siblings, your parents, right? There's various emotions that you go through inside of those relationships. But you don't walk away from the relationship because you love the person. You care about them. You're not always happy with your mom, but you still love her. You're not going to cut her out of your life because you're mad right now. Sometimes you're sad. Sometimes you're disappointed. Sometimes you might be at the point of rage. Sometimes guilt. You're going to experience all the emotions. Love is not one of a bunch of emotions, right? Love is a commitment, a relationship that you have, right? It's a sense of care towards another person, right? The word care. I like the word care, right? We're going to go with that. Because the reality is this. If love is care, the opposite of love is apathy, right? The opposite of love is not hate. It's indifference, right? Because again, hate is a passion emotion. When you care enough about someone to be angry as a result of something they did, there is a level of care there. That's not apathy. That's not indifference. The opposite of love is that I couldn't care less about what you do or what you say. But no, anger is a passion emotion. It's a positive emotion above homeostasis. So something someone says or someone does has enough of an effect on you that it bothers you. Why? Because you care about that person to some level. Right? Your coaches get mad at you and they yell at you. Your parents get mad at you and they yell at you. Your teachers yell at you. Why? Because it bothers them, which means they have some level of interest in you. They have some level of care for what happens to you. If your coaches, teachers, whatever, parents are apathetic, if they're indifferent, that means that nothing you do changes their emotional state. That's a problem. That's a problem. That means they don't care enough about you to be disappointed. You got to think about it that way, right? Anger is biological, and it's not always healthy, but at the same time, it's a level of care. It's a level of passion. You're angry because you're disappointed, or you're angry because you're hurt, right? You're not going to be angry with someone with whom you have no interest, no care, right? So love, let's call it a level of care for another person, right? So you care enough about your siblings that you're not going to abandon them even when they do a ton of selfish things, right? And it's dysfunctional. Right? It's dysfunctional. If your brother is an addict and keeps, hurting your mom's feelings and the relationship is horrendously toxic and it causes strain in the family, but you don't cut that person out of your life because you can't. You have a level of care for them. You're not going to stop caring for them. You can't help it. That's what love is. It's not how you feel about your brother right now. It's because of the care that you possess for the well-being of that person. It's outgoing. It's not like I love you because I care about me. No. I love you because for whatever reason, I care what happens to you. It's a level of care that you have. It's a disposition toward a person. It's a commitment that you have. At the end of the day, bottom line, it's a commitment. Even if you don't look like I chose to commit to my brother, or your mom or whatever, but you did, because it's a relationship that you're locked into with them. It's not based on emotion. Sometimes, in fact, it's in spite of emotion. I still care about you even though I don't feel like it. So in that essence, it very literally cannot be an emotion, because emotions fluctuate with homeostasis. Love does not. It's a constant, right? That's why it's so hard to stop loving someone, right? Even when they're toxic to you or they're dysfunctional, because you do care about them. There's a level of care that you possess, right? And that's problematic sometimes. So it's a commitment that persists long after the feeling in which the commitment was made. Yes, maybe at one time you were so intoxicated by the thought of that person and so romantically attracted, and they just made you weak in the knees, and that's how the relationship started. But that's not how the care grows. Once the feeling fades, the care continues. So the longer you have positive relationships with people, the more you care about them, not less. And that's good, because you're thinking the excitement fades, I'm bored. No, it doesn't work that way. You can't just break up with somebody that you care about and then not think about them anymore, because you still care about them, right? You can't just separate yourself from that connection. So if you change the thought process of love and say that's what love is, it's this level of care I have for another person, the longer you're in a functional relationship, the more you're going to care about them, not less, just like your friendships. So that's good news. It's not just boiled down to your physical attraction to them. It's a level of intimate connection you have with another person. That grows with time. It doesn't diminish with time. That's a good thing, right? The relationship becomes stronger, the longest relationship you have, right? So let's think about this. In that vein, inside of a relationship, you have to decide trust breakers versus deal breakers. Deal breakers are things like, if this happens, the relationship's over. I can't get over it. So there should be very few actual deal breakers, right? So how much can a healthy relationship withstand? How much should it have to withstand? At what point should we terminate it? That's a question I get a lot. How do I know if I break up with somebody, or do we work on it? Variables to consider. Are there children? Do you live together? Do you have joint friends, coworkers? How intertwined is your life? And I know it seems like, well, I'm supposed to just put up with dysfunction because we have a connected life. Well, no, but it's a lot harder to get out of a relationship that's deeply rooted, is my point. Trust breakers are addiction, secrecy, infidelity. Again, infidelity is not necessarily a deal breaker, right? Obviously, there's some complications there, right? Mental, emotional, or physical affairs, emotional damage, or even abuse. Now, here's, again, like I mentioned yesterday, I firmly believe you need two willing parties to make a relationship work. You do. And it doesn't mean that when you violate trust, you're not going to have to earn the trust back. I give the metaphor in the toxic relationship video, if you want to go back and watch that from the spring, that trust is like little tiny drops in a bucket or in a cup. And like it takes a long time of single individual acts to build a level of trust, and a single act of just pouring that trust out all over the table. And so I'm not going to lie to you and say that if you perform one of these actions in a romantic relationship, that's a trust breaker. And healthy relationships are founded on trust. And it's going to take some time and a lot of effort to build that trust back up. It's not instant, right? I can forgive you, but you still have to earn my trust back. So I'm not saying you just forgive and forget instantly, but it's not the same thing as a deal breaker, right? Physical and emotional abuse might be a deal breaker, obviously, at this stage in your life. And even at another stage in your life, I would say physical abuse should be a deal breaker anyway, right? Because if someone's going to put their hands on you, that's probably not something that you want to try to overcome. So I'm going to call physical abuse threat of harm to self or children, unwillingness to change. At some point, it's going to take a while. It's not the first incident. But at some point, you're going to quickly realize that you're the only person in the canoe rowing, right? That's that metaphor. And if you're the only person trying and there's one willing party, you may have reached a point where the relationship has run its course, right? Unwillingness to change or accept responsibility. And again, this is good advice. Before you and again, we're talking long-term, serious, committed relationships, maybe even marriages here. So it's still a good idea to start with a trial separation. Create some distance. Allow people to process their thoughts. And distance does a lot of good things sometimes because it forces people to contemplate what matters. If your relationship is not in a good place and you get a trial separation, both of you can work on yourself. And that person's going to decide one of two things. They're going to decide they were wrong and you're really important to them and they need to fix it. Or they're going to decide it's not worth it and they're going to back out. But either way, you're better off. So don't ignore problems in a relationship. They just become bigger problems. So this is underrated. Sometimes take a break, as Ross and Rachel would say in Friends, right? Take a break. Trial separation. Then you realize you get time to reflect. You're away from the person. You're not giving in to their emotions. You're not feeling guilty and empathetic and you give in and you violate your own moral code. No, take separation. Don't talk to each other for a while. Don't spend time together. Just process it. Ruminate on it. Think about it. Meditate on it. Work on yourself. Let them work on themselves. If they don't change after a separation, I think you have your answer. If they don't care that you're separated, I think you have your answer. If you don't care that you're separated, I think you have your answer. Right? But start with the trial separation. That's a good option. This is what I think are some of the top relationship killers, what I'll call love distortion, so I'll just go through them quickly. Lack of communication, jealousy, competition, laziness, wounding language, that's important. We don't use our words to wound people, right? Lack of trust, busyness, that's a form of complacency. Sometimes you make yourself busy and you don't pour into the relationship like you should. Closed off emotionally or unavailable emotionally. Secretive, that's a problem. If people are secretive, they have something to hide, or for whatever reason they think they have something to hide. Being unsupportive of your accomplishments, that's a red flag too. If you're in a competition to the point where somebody is threatened by your success, that could be an issue. Now again, you do have to compromise. So maybe you are the one in your accomplishments that has become so busy and so wrapped up in your own personal accomplishments that you're not pouring into the relationship. So again, keep in mind, we have to evaluate which one is it. Are your accomplishments taking the place of the relationship? Is that thing taking the place of your significant other? Or are they jealous? It happens, right? Loss of affection, that can be problematic, right? That can be problematic. That's a sign of apathy, right? It's a sign of apathy usually when people don't feel romantically affectionate or display affection. And again, of course, apathy and indifference, right? That's what I think are those love distortions, or these, like if we have cognitive distortions, we can have love distortions. These are relationship killers, I think. All right, so we could go into a lot more details about a lot of different stuff. I think that was like a real quick overview, fast talking, but I want a little bit of time to debrief this.